Hello viewers. Well, by now many of you will have seen the recent Showdown coverage, but recently I got to interview a man to find out where it all started for Codemasters. David Darling. He was one of the two brothers, himself and Richard, who created Codemasters many years ago, and I got the opportunity to catch up with him, have a chat and find out where he is today and what he's going to be working on in the future. Let's take a look at this. Hello viewers. Well, today I'm joined by David Darling, who's Chief Executive Officer of Kwalee, and we're going to talk a little bit about your epic history, which goes back more than 20 years and 25 years in the games industry, creating Codemasters and all the rest of it. But what I'd like to begin with is the very beginning of your career, how you got into gaming, what your passion was early on, how early that started. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Okay. My granddad was... He used to design colour televisions, so he taught me and my brother how to build electronic circuits and radios and different kind of electronic gadgets. And then when computers came out, we really liked playing around with computers like the Commodore PET and Commodore VIC-20 and things like that. And then we also really liked playing games in the arcades like Pac-Man and Galaxians and Defender and all those classics. So the two kind of things naturally fitted together where we wanted to make our own games. And then once we'd made a few games, then we thought, why don't we try and sell them? So we just did an advert in Popular Computing Weekly and like a half-page black and white ad, and that's how we got started.
Now, I see, obviously, looking at your background, you come from a large family. You moved about a lot when you was younger. How did you find the time? Was it something you found you were just naturally gifted for when you started learning computer programming and using computers?
I learnt how to program at school in Canada in the maths lessons. They had half of one of the semesters they were teaching programming, and I really enjoyed it. And we used to have to fill out punch cards like on pieces of paper with a pencil, because there was only one keyboard and there was like 40 kids. So we had to do punch card programming, which was quite laborious. So then I used to stay after school and use the computer in the evenings, and that's how I kind of learnt.
Now, when you say punch card programming, is that like sort of lists of programming that you would put into the computers that was predetermined? Yeah,
you had like kind of a card maybe as big as that, and then there'd be rows, and you would, with your pencil, you'd just fill in boxes. Right. And when you'd finish your code, then you'd get say like a stack of 50 of them, and you'd put them in the punch card reader, and it would just read them. And that's how you'd program the computer.
And obviously my knowledge will begin with Codemasters, creating Codemasters. You created it with your brother.
BMX Simulator was the first game that my brother wrote. My brother programmed that one, and Dizzy was maybe about our 6th or 8th game or something, and the Oliver Twins did that one.
As I say, my first Codemasters game was Super Stuntman back in the day. But I was saying, at the time it was, so difficult once you were playing. There's a little bit of lag for me in the controls back then, and so the games were almost impossible sometimes as well. So it was pretty tough. But how many games were you pumping out a year in that era?
Maybe in the first year we probably did like 15 or 20 games, but it didn't take long to write games in those days. You could do a game in a few weeks with 2 or 3 programmers, so it was a lot quicker. Nowadays there's like massive teams in the console industry, but in mobile that's one of the things that is attractive, because you can make games really quickly. Like you can have a good idea and then do it within a couple of months, hopefully.
So it's kind of almost been a regression actually with what you're doing now with the mobile stuff, is to perhaps more hands-on, and you're able to, there's not the sort of management process because games are so big and expensive now. Just moving on to the next stage of your career, really. You went from the home computers, whatever, Amstrad, Commodore Spectrum or Sinclair Spectrum was your core format, to console. Did that suddenly increase then? Was there suddenly a need for a lot more stuff when you went to, say, the NES and the Mega Drive and that kind of era?
Yeah, the company kind of grew in stages. First of all, we were doing 8-bit home computers. Then we moved up to 16-bit home computers like the Commodore Amiga and Atari ST. And then the market really changed to consoles, so we started doing Sega and Nintendo. And we had a really successful product called Genie, which was like a cheat cartridge that it made Mario so he could jump twice as high and all that kind of stuff. And that was really successful in America, and it helped fund the growth of the company onto console.
Now, Game Genie, I never even knew you guys were involved in that. Game Genie, it was a bit of a bumpy road for you guys, wasn't it? There was a few court cases and stuff like that. What was that all about?
Well, that was because Nintendo really tightly controlled all the licensing, and they really wanted everything that on Nintendo to be licensed, and it was an unlicensed product. So the way they tried to stop it was to say that because we were changing the games, they were saying that was a copyright infringement because you have a right to make a derivative work. So they got Miyamoto, the guy who invented Mario, to say that he wasn't happy about it. But in the end, the judge said, because the game wasn't fixed, it was a transient thing, that it was okay, we weren't actually infringing anything. But it took a few years to get there.
No, I know. I remember Game Genie was a huge product at the time. Mega Drive, obviously, we'll talk about Micro Machines later with Andrew, but for me, Micro Machines was huge at the time. It was a great game. I remember Micro Machines 2 had the additional controller ports in the cartridge as well, enabled up to 8 players at the time. I remember Violet Berlin was in it from Bad Influence at the time as well. So how had the company grown at that point? Because I think Codemasters had come much more to the fore then, hadn't you? You'd had the Game Genie and the success of those titles. How did that transform the game development process for you, and what your job was in a growing Codemasters?
Well, in some ways it was still similar. Like, we were used to working with really original, innovative programmers on the home computers. And then on the console, the teams got a bit bigger. So say we put Andrew Graham into a team, and he had maybe like 7 or 8 people working with him on the original Micro Machines on the Nintendo. And then on the Mega Drive, it was probably a similar sized team. So the teams weren't massive in those days. It was still mostly about creativity and innovation, and also speed to market and trying to get things into the market quickly. So
from making those games, what were the next titles then, taking you from, say, 92 was that, to 90, say 7? What were the key titles from there?
Well, at the beginning of console, we had things like Micro Machines and Treasure Island Dizzy and Fantasy World Dizzy and things like that. And then later on, the next transition really was when we developed a good relationship with Sony when they launched the PlayStation. It was the first kind of they were promoting it as the first 3D console, and so we did Colin McRae Rally was a huge title for us, and Micro Machines V3 was also very big. So
wasn't Toka Touring Car, was that out before? That was out before, and that was a big step, wasn't it, Toka, for you guys? Because that was a huge hit at the time.
Yeah, my brother did worked with the developers on a prototyping the racing physics, and once it was all working really well, then we split it into 2 teams, and we had the Toka team and the Colin McRae team. And I think you're right, the Toka team got out the door first. So.
As I remember it, you obviously had Toka, which was huge, but graphically it was pushing hard. Sound was incredible at the time. I think you guys had the best sound by a mile. Then obviously you had Micro Machines V3 out. And that was a much bigger development, wasn't it? Had the cost gone up by then, on development? Because obviously it's constantly growing. What kind of impact did working on the PS1 have to the transformation in development?
Yeah, PS1 was still not huge teams. It was really when it went to PS2 and PS3 that you end up having teams of 100 people, which is massive. It's like making a Hollywood blockbuster movie almost.
Well, I say because I know in the 90s obviously you had Micro Machines V3, which was huge on Platinum. It just seemed to sell day in, day out. And then you had Colin McRae Rally, which is arguably one of the biggest ever racing titles for Codemasters. And Colin McRae 2 was even bigger. The company was at a crest of a wave. You even had mountain biking, didn't you? Where did the idea for something like that come from? Was that still sort of searching for innovation, or was at this stage, was it because of the growing investments, was it compromising some of the creative process at all?
Well, the mountain biking came from, I think we were thinking, we always tried to do games based on popular themes. So the first game we did was BMX Simulator. and then we did Grand Prix Simulator and all the simulators. And then I think the mountain biking was like a throwback, thinking, well, we haven't done a BMX game for ages. And nowadays, mountain biking is more popular than BMX. So we thought, well, we'll do a downhill mountain biking game. And we worked with a really good Swedish company to do that.
3, 2, 1, go!
Now, there's a couple of titles I forgot actually. Of course, there's Brian Lara Cricket, which was huge for you guys, wasn't it? Really, PS2 then, what were the key titles in the PS2 taking me through to say, early Xbox and stuff?
Well, we also had, there was, before on PS1 we had Jonah Lomu Rugby as well. So we did like kind of sport, and Pete Sampras tennis. So we did lots of sports titles. And that was really like a carry through from our simulator idea. So we're trying to simulate real life events as closely as possible.
It's funny you mentioned that actually, because I saw a term about simulation here, and you've been taken over now by Excalibur recently. They're doing Street Cleaning Simulator and everything else now as the core sort of simulating company. But you were known as the simulator company in the sort of 80s with everything that you brought out. I never really looked at it, sports games were such as simulations in that way, but obviously maintaining that theme.
Yeah, well, we started off calling them simulators, like we would have like Rugby Simulator, but later on then we just used the brands like Brian Lara. But I don't know, me and Richard particularly liked making games as realistic as possible and try and get the physics as realistic as possible, because human beings are used to how that works in everyday life, and they really appreciate if you can get to the similar kind of quality in a game.
Now, let's get to, say, 2004 to 2007, finishing at Codemasters. What were the titles you were involved in those stages?
We started doing a game called Dragon Empires, which was like a massively multiplayer game, and that took like years to develop. And so we were trying to get into the massively multiplayer area, and then we were keeping going with things like Colin McRae, but we were trying to globalise it. And the same with Toka, so we did Race Driver, and in Australia it was like Super V8 supercars, and so we were still doing so it was those kind of games. But then it was still the same thing really, where you just say, okay, let's do a skiing game, or let's do a game about such and such. But when you have like a team of 100 people in a budget of like £10 million, it really makes you risk adverse, because you don't want to waste that money and you don't want to waste those people. So you end up doing sequel after sequel, because it's so much less risky to do a sequel than it is to do a completely new project. What we're doing now at Kwalee is doing like all the games we're doing is new games, and we can afford to take big risks and be innovative.
So, from Codemasters, you left Codemasters, had a break, and you've come back now with Kwalee. Talk me through that process and what the plan is here for the future.
Well, I wanted to get back into the industry because I realised after I took a break that what I really like doing is games, but I didn't want to get back into console games because the teams are too big and the timescales are too big. And I've been like an iPhone Apple fanatic for years and years, since the iPhone first came out, and beforehand with Apple laptops and things. So I just thought it was amazing carrying around that much power in a computer in your pocket, the potential of what you could do with it, and all of the GPS and camera and different things. So it was just a really attractive device to be as an innovative platform to do kind of inventive and new types of games. So I wanted to get back into the industry doing, and also because it's digital distribution and you didn't have all the retailers and the stock control and worldwide distribution, which is an absolute nightmare. If you do a fantastic game, you can get it out to millions of people, but it's like a big hurdle. But if you can achieve it, that's a really attractive part of the mobile industry.
Now, talking of liking them, you blew one up here, I can see. This was an iPad 3. What was the idea behind that?
Yeah, well, our latest game, our first game on the iPhone is called Go Bang, which is actually, it's like a Vietnamese version of like a strategy game, but the English called, like 100 years ago, the English called it Go Bang, so we've called our game Go Bang.
Right.
So we thought, what better way to celebrate the name of the game than to actually blow up Apple's new iPad. So we had an explosion with a bomb last week,
and no doubt we'll have some of that to show the viewers as well. I suppose what's amazing is when you open an iPad, is actually to viewers at home, this is the bit, and I'll show you a little close-up of this. This is an iPad. So there we go. So I don't think many people have seen one open before, but certainly we'll be showing you a little bit more on that. So at the moment then, you're working on your first game, an epic new long-term thing for you guys now.
Yeah, well, we're concentrating on doing like social mobile games. So we're trying to do games where people play together, and they can, if they really like the game, they can invite more players into the game. So, because since Micro Machines, I've always been a big fan of multiplayer gaming, because we saw then how much more people enjoyed playing with their friends than just playing on their own.
Well, brilliant, David. It's certainly been insightful talking to you about it today, and I look forward to seeing more of Kwalee, what they offer in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
So an interesting and insightful interview there into the background of David and what he's going to be working on at Kwalee in the future. Obviously, when you start in a games company, it's very hands-on, and as it grows, all these layers, your role changes within it. And obviously, this has really given him the opportunity with the growth of iPhone gaming to get stuck in and get hands-on. But it's such a rich history, isn't it? I mean, Codemasters, together with the Oliver twins and other people who worked for them at the time, and some great designers over the years, have made Codemasters what it is today. And it's a great automotive brand, but it's also known the world over for the years and years of development. And I hope this interview has been historically interesting for you guys, just to take a look at and see where they've come from as we look at the games of the future and Showdown and whatever Grid 2 and Formula 1 have to offer in the future for them. Meanwhile, for Kwalee, we'll take a look at a few of their titles as well in the coming months, as we do a little bit more in the way of handhelds and indie games and stuff like that. But that's it from me for now, viewers. As ever, more soon.
Was that my iPad?